Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is August 17th. On this day in 1980, a family camping trip to Uluru turned into a national tragedy, one that would be picked apart in courtrooms, sensationalized in headlines, and twisted into one of the most enduring pop culture phrases in the world. It began with a mother's desperate cry, "The dingoes got my baby." Some believed her instantly. Others thought it was an impossible story. Today, we're discussing the death of Azaria Chamberlain, one of the most sensational and bitterly divided legal cases in Australian history, where the search for justice became entangled with public opinion, flawed forensic science, and cultural bias. Let's get started. On August 17th, 1980, the Chamberlain family, Michael, Lindy, and their children, were camping at the base of Uluru, known then as Ayers Rock. The outback air was cool. Families gathered around campfires, children played, and the desert sky was studded with stars. In their tent, 2-month-old Azaria Chamberlain was asleep, tucked into a small sleeping bag by her mother. Not long after, Lindy walked back toward the tent and saw something. It was just a shadow at first, but it slipped away into the darkness. She rushed forward, looked inside the tent, and found it empty. Her voice broke through the night air. "The dingoes got my baby." The cry jolted the campsite. People ran in all directions with flashlights, shouting Azaria's name. Searchers combed the area through the night. By morning, there was still no sign of her. There were no footprints leading to a hidden corner of the campground and no wails of a child being carried away. But then, a single piece of evidence surfaced. Azaria's jumpsuit, blood-stained at the neck, was discovered beneath a ledge of Uluru. For the police, the public, and the media, this was all they had to go on. But to Aboriginal tracker Nipper Winmarty, who examined the sand near the tent, the story was clearer. There were dingo tracks leading away from the campsite, and the indentations in the sand were consistent with the animal carrying something heavy. When the first inquest began that December, Magistrate Dennis Barrett accepted Lindy's account, concluding that a dingo had indeed taken Azaria, but added an unsettling caveat. Someone else might have interfered with her body afterwards. It was a strange blend of belief and suspicion, and it left the public with more questions than answers. And that phrase, "the dingoes got my baby," would take on a life of its own, repeating endlessly in newspapers and later in TV shows and comedy sketches, stripping it of its grief and turning it into something almost unrecognizable. At first, public sympathy for the Chamberlains was high, but that began to shift in 1981. In September, the Northern Territory Supreme Court overturned the first inquest's findings and ordered a second inquest in Darwin. This time, the tone was entirely different. The prosecution came armed with what they called new forensic evidence. The evidence included apparent bloodstains in the Chamberlain's yellow Honda Torana and an incised mark around the neck of Azaria's jumpsuit, which they argued was more consistent with a blade than with an animal's teeth. Forensic expert James Cameron testified that a dingo could not have caused such an injury. The story in the courtroom shifted. Lindy was now accused of murdering her baby. On October 29, 1982, she was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Michael Chamberlain was convicted as an accessory after the fact and received a suspended sentence. The court of public opinion followed. The media zeroed in on Lindy's calm demeanor, her lack of overt tears, and her unusual-sounding faith as a Seventh-day Adventist. Headlines cast her as cold, detached, and even dangerous. The truth would only begin to surface 6 years later. In February 1986, a British tourist fell to his death near Uluru. As rescuers searched the base of the rock, they found something unexpected. A tiny jacket partly buried near dingo layers. It was exactly what Lindy had always said Azaria was wearing over her jumpsuit that night, an item prosecutors claimed never existed. The discovery was a turning point. Within days, Lindy was released from prison and the case was reopened. A royal commission led by Justice Trevor Morling re-examined every scrap of evidence. The so-called blood in the car? It wasn't blood at all. The cut in the jumpsuit? It wasn't made by a knife. And the forensic testing was flawed from the start. Morling's report left no room for doubt. There was no basis for the hypothesis that Lindy had murdered her daughter. On September 15, 1988, the Northern Territory Court of Criminal Appeals quashed both convictions. The Chamberlains were officially exonerated. But exoneration couldn't erase the years of ridicule. From the moment Lindy had spoken those words in the desert, the media had shaped her into a caricature. Her religion became a point of suspicion, and she was analyzed and criticized for every facial expression, every outfit, and every moment she didn't cry. The story was too sensational to let go, and pop culture pounced. In 1988, the film Evil Angels, released internationally as A Cry in the Dark, premiered with Meryl Streep portraying Lindy. The film's harrowing courtroom scenes brought some public empathy back, but for many, the mocking tone set by years of media coverage was already ingrained. It wasn't until 2012, 32 years after Azaria's death, that the final coroner's report closed the case for good. And it stated clearly, a dingo killed Azaria Chamberlain. August 17, 1980 should have been another quiet night under the desert sky. Instead, it became the first chapter in a decades-long fight for the truth. The Chamberlains lost their daughter, their freedom, and their reputation, but they never stopped telling the same story. And in the end, that story was proven to be true. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!